He wasn't supposed to wait this long. The words echoed softly in the empty ward as Blizzard, a white German shepherd, sat rigidly by the edge of a hospital bed, his paws resting lightly on the cold linoleum floor. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered intermittently, casting a pallid glow that bounced off the pale green walls and the faint sheen of medical equipment. Outside, the wind whipped around the Charleston streets, rattling the aluminum siding and carrying the distant cries of gulls over the salt-scented air. The rain had stopped an hour ago, leaving the cobblestone streets slick and reflective, the gray clouds hanging low like a mournful shroud. Blizzard's amber eyes, bright against the stark whiteness of his fur, scanned every shadow, every movement in the room, yet never strayed from the empty bed where Marcus Carter, a U.S. Marine with skin darkened by years under the sun and trials overseas, had last rested. Marcus's absence was tangible, a weight pressing on Blizzard's chest that mirrored the tension in the air. The scent of antiseptic mingled with the faint iron tang that always lingered in hospitals, and Blizzard twitched his nose, ears stiffening, as if reading the story that words could not tell. Every sound became amplified, the soft hum of ventilators, the distant wheeling of a gurney, the quiet shuffle of nurses' shoes, but none of it drew his attention away from the empty mattress. The room smelled faintly of bleach and warmth, a juxtaposition that felt like hope dangling just out of reach. Blizzard shifted slightly, the soft scrape of his claws on the floor sending a ripple through the quiet. He leaned forward, resting his head on the edge of the bed, amber eyes focused on the blank pillow, as if willing Marcus to appear. Outside the window, a stray sunbeam broke through the cloud cover, illuminating motes of dust that danced lazily in the still air, and for a heartbeat, Blizzard seemed to pause with them, suspended between patience and anticipation. In the hall, the faint murmur of distant voices hinted at the human world moving on without him. But Blizzard remained unmoving, a sentinel in white, faithful and silent. His tail thumped. Once against the tile, a soft, deliberate rhythm that matched the pulse of hope in the room. Each breath he took fogged slightly in the cold air, a visible manifestation of his vigil, the slow rise and fall marking the passage of time in a place where moments stretched infinitely. The scent of Marcus's cologne lingered faintly, ghostly and comforting, a reminder of the bond that had survived deserts, storms, and battles far beyond the hospital's walls. Blizzard's gaze swept over the scattered equipment, the folded blankets, the solitary chair, and back to the bed, his eyes never blinking, storing every detail as if etching the memory into his very being. A light creak from the hallway made him lift his head, ears twitching toward the sound, yet he did not move. He had learned the discipline of waiting, the measured patience of a K-9 who had known loss before. Outside, the faint glow of dawn began to seep through the blinds, washing the room in a pale golden hue, and Blizzard's ears perked, recognizing the shift in light as a sign, a whisper of presence beyond the visible. His body tensed subtly, muscles coiled like springs, and his gaze hardened, focused on the direction of the door, every fiber attuned to the possibility of Marcus's return. The world outside might be indifferent, chaotic, and loud, but within these walls, Blizzard carried a stillness that spoke of loyalty without expectation, of faith that did not require proof. A soft murmur of voices approached closer, accompanied by the rhythmic tapping of shoes against linoleum, and Blizzard's head lifted slightly higher, nostrils flaring gently, picking up the subtle scent of Marcus's familiar sweat and the faintest trace of leather from his uniform. The room seemed to hold its breath with him, the quiet punctuated only by the intermittent beep of monitors and the rustle of linens. Blizzard shifted again, resting on his haunches, tail brushing the floor with precise, almost ceremonial motion, and his eyes fixed unerringly on the empty bed, a silent promise made to the man who had once called him companion, protector, and friend. The world outside might move on, lives might continue, but here, in this moment, Blizzard existed in pure devotion, each heartbeat echoing the unspoken vow. Wait, watch, believe, endure, for Marcus Carter's return is the miracle worth every second of this vigil. The first light of morning filtered through the narrow blinds, casting stripes across the pale green walls, and Blizzard lifted his head slightly, nostrils quivering as he caught the faint scent of Marcus drifting through the hallway. The distant echo of footsteps on linoleum drew him into alertness, ears tilting forward, tail brushing the floor in slow, measured sweeps. The air held the sharp tang of antiseptic, mingling with the lingering aroma of Marcus's own scent, faint but unmistakable, a tether to the man who had shared deserts, dawn patrols, and silent nights under starlit skies. Blizzard rose onto his paws, muscles coiling under the pristine white fur, and stepped lightly across the floor, paws making no sound on the cool tile, each movement deliberate, disciplined, the result of years spent training and surviving together. Outside, a soft drizzle had begun, the wind carrying it over the rooftops of Charleston, tapping lightly against the window panes, creating a rhythm that mirrored the tension in Blizzard's chest. He paused at the edge of the bed, amber eyes scanning the empty space, and then toward the door again, every sense stretched taut, reading the subtle shifts in light and shadow, listening for the faintest whisper of Marcus's voice. Memories flashed unbidden. The first time Marcus had called him by name on a scorching morning in Kandahar, the way his hand had settled on Blizzard's shoulder, the quiet command in his tone that required trust, loyalty, and focus. Each memory anchored Blizzard, reminded him of a bond that was not broken by distance or circumstance, only strengthened by endurance. The room seemed to hold its breath with him as the distant murmur of voices approached, soft footsteps accompanied by the faint clinking of metal, the shuffle of paper, and the low hum of the heating system. Blizzard's eyes flicked toward the hall again, muscles coiled, body low, ready to move at the slightest signal. Every subtle movement outside the door, every whisper of sound, every change in the light brought a ripple of awareness through him. He lowered his body slightly, pressing closer to the floor, and then rose again as a shadow fell across the corridor, a shape familiar and deeply missed. Marcus's silhouette emerged, his gait cautious yet steady, the subtle weight of his injuries evident in the careful placement of each foot. Blizzard's tail thumped once, then twice, a slow, deliberate rhythm of recognition, anticipation, and restrained excitement. The air between them seemed to thicken, the hospital room narrowing to the two of them, the noises of the outside world fading to a soft murmur, like wind through distant trees. Blizzard inched forward, the careful patting of paws across tile punctuated by the faint scrape of nails, and as Marcus drew closer, the small tremor in his voice called out Blizzard's name, gentle, barely above a whisper, a sound imbued with relief, recognition, and love. Blizzard's ears lifted, eyes widening, and he froze for the briefest heartbeat, registering the sound, the scent, the presence that confirmed what his instincts had known all along. Then, in a slow, deliberate motion, he approached, body low, head moving toward Marcus's outstretched hand, amber eyes locked onto the green-gray gaze of the Marine. The world seemed to fall away, leaving only the two of them, the space between charged with unspoken words, memories of shared duty, and the quiet knowledge that neither time nor distance had diminished their bond. Each step Blizzard took was measured, every muscle coiled, ready for the instant connection, until he finally rested his head against Marcus's knee, breath warm, fur soft against the uniform, a living reminder of loyalty, patience, and the silent strength that had carried them through countless trials. The distant footsteps and voices faded further, replaced by the rhythmic rise and fall of Blizzard's breathing, harmonizing with Marcus's own slow, steady breaths, and the room was suffused with a calm, almost reverent stillness. Light filtered more fully through the blinds now, painting gentle patterns across the floor, catching in the white fur and the amber glow of eyes that held history, trust, and hope. Blizzard pressed closer, tail sweeping softly against the linoleum, and Marcus's hand lowered, resting lightly atop the dog's head, fingers tracing the familiar curves of skull and ears. In that quiet, sunlit room, time itself seemed to pause, honoring the reunion, the trust reaffirmed, and the subtle, profound understanding that even in moments of silence, in spaces where words failed, the bond between a Marine and his K-9 endured, resilient, unwavering, and sacred. Marcus Carter did not speak again for several seconds, because some names are too heavy to say twice, when grief has already heard them once. His hand remained on Blizzard's head. Fingers sunk into the thick white fur between the dog's ears, feeling the warmth of a life he had spent too many nights praying was not lost. Blizzard stood still beneath that touch, not restless, not confused, not excited in the ordinary way dogs become excited when a familiar voice returns. He was reverent, almost careful, as if he understood that the man in front of him had come back from a place where even strong men leave pieces of themselves behind. Nurse Emily Hayes stood near the doorway with a folded blanket in her arms, but she had stopped moving. Behind her, two other nurses slowed without knowing why, their shoes quiet against the polished floor, their voices fading into the soft mechanical breathing of the ward. None of them wanted to interrupt. There was something in the room that felt older than medicine, older than orders, older than the bright monitors and the clean white sheets. Marcus took one careful breath, then lowered himself into the chair beside the bed, his movements slow from weakness, his shoulders still broad beneath the plain hospital shirt, his dark skin touched by the pale gold of the morning light. Blizzard followed the motion instantly, stepping close enough that his chest brushed Marcus's knee, then sat with military precision, eyes lifted, waiting for the next command that never came. Marcus looked down at him and tried to smile, but the smile broke before it reached his eyes. "You waited," he whispered. Blizzard blinked once, then pressed his muzzle against Marcus's hand. That was all. No bark, no leap, no sudden rush of movement. Just the quiet weight of loyalty answering a question no one else in the hospital had known how to ask. The nurses saw Marcus's fingers tremble as he touched the worn leather collar hidden beneath Blizzard's thick fur. It was not the collar issued by the clinic. It was older, softened by years of weather, with a small metal tag that had been rubbed nearly smooth. Marcus turned it gently between his fingers, and for a moment the hospital vanished from his face. He was no longer in Charleston. He was somewhere far away, under a sky bleached white by heat, with sand on his boots and a young white shepherd beside him, both of them learning the rhythm of trust one command at a time. Blizzard had been barely 2 years old then, too quiet for some handlers, too watchful for others. They said he did not respond like most dogs. They said he studied a man before obeying him. Marcus had liked that. Trust should never be cheap. On their first morning together, Blizzard had refused to move for 3 full minutes, sitting beneath the hard sun while Marcus knelt in front of him, palm open, saying nothing. No pulling, no forcing, no pride, just patience. At last, the dog stepped forward and placed one paw in Marcus's hand, and from that moment, the Marine understood something he never forgot. Blizzard would not follow fear. He would follow faith. That memory returned now with such force that Marcus had to close his eyes. The smell of the ward softened into the remembered scent of dust, leather, and warm metal. He remembered long nights when Blizzard slept outside his tent, not because he had been ordered to, but because he had chosen that patch of earth as his post. He remembered the way the dog could sense a storm before the clouds gathered, the way he could hear unease in another man's breathing, the way he leaned against Marcus after difficult days without asking for anything in return. Back then, Marcus had been younger, sharper around the edges, a staff sergeant who believed discipline could hold back every kind of sorrow. Blizzard had taught him otherwise. The dog had taught him that strength was not always loud. Sometimes strength was a white body lying across a doorway so a tired Marine could sleep. Sometimes courage was a cold nose nudging a hand that had forgotten how to unclench. Emily shifted slightly in the doorway, wiping beneath one eye with the back of her wrist before pretending to adjust the blanket. She had worked 12 years in hospitals. She had seen families reunited, prayers answered, and quiet goodbyes carried out beneath fluorescent lights. But she had never seen a dog look at a man as if he had been guarding his soul. Marcus opened his eyes and bent forward until his forehead rested lightly against Blizzard's. The dog exhaled, long and slow, as though releasing all the hours he had held inside himself beside that empty bed. Down the hall, a monitor chimed softly. Rain tapped the window again, gentle now, no longer warning, only witnessing. Marcus whispered, "I thought I lost you, boy." Blizzard answered by lifting one paw and placing it carefully on Marcus's shoe, the same way he had placed it in his hand years before beneath the desert sun. This time, Marcus did not try to hide the tears. Neither did the nurses. The room remained quiet after Marcus's tears fell, but the silence had changed. Before, it had been the silence of waiting. Now it felt like the silence after a prayer has been heard. Blizzard kept his paw on Marcus's shoe, steady and warm, his white fur glowing softly beneath the morning light that slipped through the blinds. Marcus sat bent forward, one hand still resting on the dog's head, the other gripping the edge of the chair as if the world might tilt if he let go. Nurse Emily Hayes set the folded blanket down without a sound and stepped back, giving them space, though she could not bring herself to leave. She had seen charts that morning. She had seen the notes from the night shift. Marcus Carter had been unresponsive for hours after being moved from the observation unit, his body exhausted, his mind somewhere unreachable. The doctors had spoken carefully, the way doctors speak when hope must be handled like glass. They had said he needed rest. They had said familiar voices might help. They had not said, a dog could do what medicine could not measure. Yet Blizzard had sat beside the empty bed all night, refusing food, refusing sleep, refusing to be taken to the kennel room on the first floor. When the orderlies tried to guide him away, he had not growled. He had not snapped. He had simply lowered his body to the floor and become heavier than grief. So Emily had made a quiet choice. She had brought him water in a steel bowl. She had placed an extra blanket near the bed. She had told the night supervisor that the dog was not disturbing anyone. That was not entirely true. Blizzard had disturbed everyone. Not with noise, but with devotion. Every nurse who passed that door slowed. Every doctor who looked and saw something that made them speak more softly. Even the young intern who always walked too fast found himself pausing at 2 in the morning, coffee cooling in his hand, watching the white canine sit beneath the thin blue hospital light like a lighthouse for one lost soul. Marcus did not know any of that yet. He only knew the feel of Blizzard's fur beneath his fingers and the ache of memory loosening inside his chest. How long was he here? Marcus asked, his voice rough. Emily swallowed before answering. Since they brought you back to this floor. Marcus looked up. All night. She nodded. All night. Blizzard's ears moved at the sound of her voice, but his eyes never left Marcus. The Marine exhaled slowly, and the breath seemed to carry years with it. That sounds like him. Emily tried to smile. He would not move. Marcus looked down at the dog. No, he would not. The words came out almost like a confession. Because Marcus remembered another night when Blizzard had refused to move, years earlier, not in a hospital, but outside a temporary shelter after a long evacuation drill in the California heat. Marcus had been training new handlers then, pretending his own heart was not worn thin. He had pushed through the day with the discipline expected of a Marine, offering commands, corrections, and quiet encouragement. But after sunset, when the heat finally lifted and the training field smelled of dust, canvas, and engine oil, Marcus had sat behind the supply shed and pressed both palms against his eyes. He had not cried. Not exactly. He had only gone empty. Blizzard had found him there without being called. The dog had lowered himself beside Marcus, shoulder against shoulder, and stayed until the stars came out. No demand. No performance. Just presence. That was Blizzard's gift. He knew when to act and when to remain. In the hospital room, Marcus ran his thumb over the old tag again. The metal felt warm from Blizzard's body. They told me you were transferred after the last deployment. Marcus murmured. I signed the papers because they said it was best for you. Blizzard tilted his head slightly, as if listening to every word. I thought you were with another unit. Safe. Working. Needed. His mouth tightened. I told myself that was enough. Emily glanced toward the hallway, where Dr. Alan Reeves stood just outside the room, his white coat open over blue scrubs, a clipboard held loosely at his side. He had come to check Marcus's vitals, but he had stopped at the door like everyone else. Dr. Reeves was a practical man, careful with miracles, suspicious of anything that sounded too simple. But even he watched the scene with softened eyes. Sergeant Carter, he said gently, stepping in. We should take a look at you. Marcus straightened slowly, though his hand did not leave Blizzard's head. Yes, sir. Blizzard shifted at once, placing himself between Marcus and the doctor for a brief second. Not aggressive, only alert. Dr. Reeves paused, then lowered his voice. It is all right, boy. I am here to help him. Marcus gave a faint, tired smile. Blizzard. The dog's ears lifted. Marcus said it again, softer. Stand down, Blizzard. The white shepherd looked back at him, searched his face, then eased aside and sat, still close enough for Marcus's knee to touch his shoulder. Emily saw Dr. Reeves blink hard before he reached for the blood pressure cuff. Some commands do not come from training. Some come from trust rebuilt across silence. As the cuff tightened around Marcus's arm, Blizzard watched every movement, his breathing calm but focused. The monitor beside the bed began its steady pattern again, small green lines rising and falling like fragile hills. Dr. Reeves studied the numbers, then looked at Marcus, then at the dog. "Your heart rate has settled," he said. Marcus did not look surprised. He looked down at Blizzard. He always did that. The doctor made a note, but his pen moved slowly. Emily knew what he was thinking. There would be no box on the chart for this. No official line for a white K9 sitting through the night, holding a man to the earth with nothing but patience. Outside, the rain thinned to a mist, and sunlight widened across the floor until it reached Blizzard's paws. The dog lowered his head onto Marcus's knee, closing his eyes for the first time since midnight. Marcus rested his hand there, gentle and certain. In that small room above the wet Charleston street, no one said the word miracle. They did not need to. By late morning, the hospital had begun to wake around them in fuller sounds. Elevator doors opened with soft chimes. Breakfast trays rolled down the hall, carrying the smell of oatmeal, black coffee, warm toast, and orange juice in small plastic cups. Voices rose and fell beyond the door, careful but alive, as Charleston General moved through another ordinary day. Yet inside Marcus Carter's room, ordinary things seemed to pause before entering. Even the sunlight appeared to slow, spreading across the floor in a wide amber patch where Blizzard lay with his head still resting against Marcus's knee. The white shepherd had finally allowed sleep to touch him, but only lightly. Every few minutes, one ear twitched toward a sound in the hall, and one amber eye opened just enough to confirm that Marcus remained within reach. Marcus watched him with a tenderness that made his own chest ache. It was strange how a man could survive years of command, distance, storms, and discipline, then be undone by the sight of a dog trusting him enough to rest. Nurse Emily Hayes returned with a cup of water and a small paper bag holding the personal items Marcus had arrived with. She placed them on the bedside table, gentle as church bells. "They found these in your jacket pocket," she said. Marcus nodded and reached for the bag with slow fingers. Inside were a folded wallet, a set of worn keys, a small Marine Corps Challenge coin, and a photograph softened at the corners. He pulled the photograph free first. It showed a younger Marcus in desert fatigues, kneeling beside Blizzard outside a training hangar at Camp Pendleton. The dog had been leaner then, his white coat dusted tan from the field, his ears sharp, his eyes fixed on Marcus as if the rest of the world did not deserve attention. Marcus stared at it for a long time. Emily saw the change in his face before he spoke. Not sadness exactly. Recognition. The kind that arrives late and sits down heavily. "That was the day he passed certification," Marcus said. His voice was quiet, still rough, but steadier than before. He ignored every distraction they threw at him. Sirens. Food. Other handlers. Nothing worked. Emily smiled faintly. "Sounds like Blizzard." Marcus looked down at the sleeping dog. No, that was the thing. He was not stubborn. He was waiting for the right voice. Blizzard's ear flicked at the sound, and Marcus let out a breath that almost became a laugh. For one fragile second, the room felt warm enough to forgive the night. Then Dr. Reeves returned with a slim folder in his hand, and the warmth shifted. Not vanished, only tightened. He stepped inside with the careful expression of a man bringing news that might bruise. Emily noticed it first. Marcus did too. Blizzard lifted his head before either of them spoke, eyes open now, body alert. Dr. Reeves closed the door halfway behind him. "Sergeant Carter," he said, "there is something we need to discuss." Marcus placed the photograph on the blanket. "All right." The doctor glanced at Blizzard, then back to Marcus. "When your records were transferred from the base liaison office, there was a note attached regarding Blizzard." Marcus went still. The sound of the hallway faded until the room held only the monitor's steady rhythm. "What kind of note?" Dr. Reeves hesitated. He was scheduled to leave today for a long-term rehabilitation kennel outside Savannah. Marcus looked down slowly. Blizzard had risen now, standing beside the chair, his body pressed against Marcus's leg as if the words had a scent. "Why?" Marcus asked. Because there was no confirmed handler listed for him anymore, Dr. Reeves said gently. His temporary clearance at the hospital was granted only because he responded when your condition became unstable last night. The base liaison considered it an exception. Emily folded her hands tightly in front of her. She had known hospital rules. She had known animal restrictions. She had known exceptions could expire. But hearing it now, after watching Blizzard hold his vigil through the night, felt like seeing a door close on a prayer. Marcus's jaw tightened, not with anger, but with the old discipline of a man trying not to break in public. He has a handler, he said. Dr. Reeves lowered his eyes to the folder. The paperwork does not say that. The sentence landed softly, and because it was soft, it hurt more. Marcus touched the old collar tag again, thumb moving over letters nearly worn smooth. Blizzard leaned into the touch, steady, certain, unaware of forms, policies, or signatures. To him, the matter had been settled years ago beneath a hard California sun when a young Marine opened his palm and waited. Marcus looked toward the window, where mist still clung to the street and the rain had left silver trails on the glass. I signed transfer papers, he said. I thought I was giving him a safer life. Emily stepped closer, voice low. You did what you believed was right. Marcus shook his head once. Believing something does not make it true. Blizzard gave a small sound then, not a bark, not a whine, but a low breath from deep in his chest. Marcus turned back to him. The dog lifted one paw and placed it carefully on the edge of the chair, close to Marcus's hand. It was not dramatic. It was not trained for the room. It was simply a reminder. I am here. Marcus swallowed hard. Dr. Reeves watched them both, then closed the folder with a quiet tap. There may be a way to request emergency handler reinstatement through the Marine liaison, he said. It would require evaluation, approval, and proof that keeping him with you supports recovery. Emily looked at the doctor, surprised by the softness in his voice. Marcus looked at Blizzard. Blizzard looked only at Marcus. In that still exchange, something old returned to the Marine's posture. Not pride. Purpose. His shoulders lifted by half an inch. His breathing steadied. His hands settled firmly on Blizzard's collar, not gripping, only claiming what had never truly been lost. Then we start now, Marcus said. Dr. Reeves nodded once. Emily blinked away tears before they could fall. Blizzard's tail moved once against the floor, slow and certain, like a quiet drumbeat beginning again. Outside the room, the hospital continued its ordinary morning. Unaware that inside one small ward, a Marine who had nearly given up was accepting a mission no medal would ever name. He was not fighting to return to who he had been. He was fighting to keep the soul that had waited for him. Marcus Carter had led difficult missions before, but none had ever begun with a hospital bracelet around his wrist, a folded photograph on his blanket, and a white German shepherd standing at attention beside his chair. The request for emergency handler reinstatement started with a phone call from Dr. Reeves to the Marine Liaison Office, then another call to the Veterans Service Coordinator, then a chain of quiet conversations that moved through the morning like cautious footsteps. No one shouted. No one made threats. The whole thing unfolded in low voices, clipped answers, and the soft rustle of forms printed at the nurse's station. Marcus listened from his room, sitting straighter than he had all day, while Blizzard stayed beside him, watching every person who entered as if each one carried a piece of their future. Nurse Emily Hayes brought a second chair for the liaison officer when he arrived shortly after noon. Captain Daniel Brooks was a tall, broad man in his early 40s with close-cut hair, polished shoes, and a face trained to reveal very little. He carried a dark folder beneath one arm and paused just inside the doorway when he saw Blizzard. The dog did not move. Neither did Marcus. For a moment, the room held the kind of stillness that comes before hard truth. Captain Brooks removed his cover, tucked it beneath his arm, and gave Marcus a respectful nod. Sergeant Carter. Marcus returned the nod. Captain. Blizzard's ears lifted at the sound of rank, as though the old rhythm of duty had entered the room. Captain Brooks glanced at him again. He looks healthier than the last report suggested. Marcus's hand moved to Blizzard's collar. Reports miss things. The captain accepted that without argument. He sat slowly, opened the folder, and spread several papers across the bedside table. Emily remained near the wall, pretending to straighten a tray that did not need straightening. Dr. Reeves stood by the monitor, arms loosely folded, eyes quiet but attentive. The room smelled of coffee, printer ink, antiseptic, and rain-damp wool from the captain's coat. Outside the window, Charleston shone under a thin gray sky, the wet street flashing silver each time a car passed below. Captain Brooks tapped one page with his finger. Blizzard was retired from active field service 6 months ago. He was placed in temporary medical observation after showing signs of stress during reassignment. Marcus's face tightened. Stress. Failure to bond with the replacement handler. Refusal to eat on schedule. Refusal to sleep indoors unless a door remained open. Repeated attempts to return to old handler scent markers. The captain looked up. Your scent markers. Marcus lowered his gaze to Blizzard, and the dog pressed closer against his leg. That small movement did more damage than any accusation could have done. Marcus saw it then, not as an idea, but as a fact alive in front of him. While he had told himself Blizzard was safe, Blizzard had been searching for a door back to him. Why was I never told? Marcus asked. Captain Brooks looked down at the file. Because your own medical status was unclear. Because the transfer had already been approved. Because systems do not always know the difference between procedure and mercy. No one spoke after that. Even Dr. Reeves looked toward the window. A gull cried somewhere beyond the glass, sharp and lonely, then vanished into the weather. Marcus drew a slow breath through his nose. What do you need from me? Captain Brooks closed the folder halfway. The reinstatement is not automatic. You are recovering. He is retired. The hospital cannot become a kennel. The Corps cannot assign a service animal based only on sentiment. Emily's eyes flashed, but she stayed silent. Marcus nodded once, accepting the hit without flinching. So test us. Captain Brooks studied him. It is not that simple. It never is, Marcus said. His voice was low, but something firm had returned to it. But he knows me. I know him. If that matters at all, test us. Blizzard seemed to understand the shift. He stood, stepped forward, and placed himself beside Marcus's left knee, shoulder aligned with the chair, head lifted. Not begging. Ready. Captain Brooks watched the position, and for the first time, his guarded expression softened. Can you give him a basic obedience sequence? Marcus looked down at Blizzard. His hand trembled slightly, but his voice did not. Blizzard. Heel. The dog moved instantly, precise and quiet, matching the line of Marcus's chair as if no time had passed. Sit. Blizzard Saturday down. He lowered smoothly, eyes never leaving Marcus. Stay. The room waited. A cart rolled past outside. A nurse laughed softly down the hall. The elevator chimed. Blizzard did not move. Captain Brooks rose and walked slowly around him, not crowding, not testing cruelty, only presence. Blizzard remained still, breathing evenly, white fur bright against the pale floor. Marcus watched with one hand resting on the arm of the chair, his jaw set, his heart written plainly in his eyes. Blizzard, Marcus said at last, softer than before. Come. The dog rose and crossed the few feet back to him, then placed his head beneath Marcus's hand without being told. Emily turned away quickly, but not before a tear slipped free. Captain Brooks cleared his throat and looked at Dr. Reeves. Medical opinion? Dr. Reeves did not hesitate. His vital signs improved after the dog entered the room. His anxiety decreased. His orientation improved. His willingness to participate in treatment improved. I can document all of it. Captain Brooks looked at Emily. Nursing observation? She faced him fully now. That dog kept him anchored through the night. I do not have a better word for it. The captain nodded slowly, then looked at Marcus. There is one more concern. Marcus waited. If approved, Blizzard stays as a therapeutic companion during recovery, pending a full review. That means responsibility. Daily care when you are able. Structured routine. No neglect of your own rehabilitation. Marcus looked at Blizzard, then back at the captain. He got me through the night. I can get through the day for him. The words were simple. That was why they worked. Captain Brooks held his gaze for a long moment, then removed a pen from his pocket. The click sounded louder than it should have, like a door unlocking somewhere no one could see. Blizzard's tail moved once against the floor. Marcus exhaled, and the breath shook on the way out. Outside, the clouds began to thin over Charleston, and a clean blade of sunlight crossed the window, reaching the floor between the Marine and the dog. It did not look like victory. Not yet. It looked like permission to keep hoping. The pen moved across the paper with a soft, deliberate scratch, and Marcus Carter watched it as if each stroke were stitching a torn piece of the morning back into place. Captain Brooks signed the first form, then the second, then paused over the final page while Dr. Reeves added his medical note in neat, careful language. Blizzard stood beside Marcus with his body angled toward the door, calm but watchful, his white coat catching the thin sunlight in a way that made him look almost unreal against the pale hospital walls. He did not understand paperwork. He did not understand temporary approval, pending review, or therapeutic companion status. He understood only tone, breath, posture, and the rhythm of the man in the chair. Marcus's breathing had changed. That was enough. Nurse Emily Hayes brought a fresh bowl of water and set it near the foot of the bed. Blizzard looked at Marcus first, waiting. Marcus gave a small nod. Go on, boy. Only then did the dog lower his head and drink, slow and controlled, each lap of water sounding strangely tender in the quiet room. Emily watched, and her mouth trembled into a smile she tried not to show. He really does ask you first, she said. Marcus looked down at Blizzard, the corners of his eyes tired but warm. He always did. Captain Brooks closed the folder and slid it beneath his arm. This approval keeps him here through your initial recovery window. The full review will come later. Marcus nodded. Thank you, sir. The captain glanced once more at Blizzard, then at the photograph on the blanket. Do not thank me yet. Do the work. Marcus held his gaze. Yes, sir. It was not a promise made for the officer. It was a promise made for the dog. After Captain Brooks left, the room felt larger, as if the walls had moved back an inch and given everyone permission to breathe. Dr. Reeves checked Marcus's chart, adjusted the monitor lead, and spoke in a voice that had lost its earlier caution. We are going to start with a short walk this afternoon. Nothing heroic. 20 feet to the nurse's station and back. Marcus raised an eyebrow. 20 feet. 20 feet, the doctor said. Recovery is built in inches before it is measured in miles. Blizzard lifted his head from the water bowl as if the word walk had traveled directly into his bones. Marcus noticed and gave a quiet laugh, the kind that surprised even him. It came out rough, almost rusty, but real. Emily heard it and looked down quickly, pretending to fold the edge of the blanket. Some sounds should not be stared at too closely when they return after a long absence. By mid-afternoon, the hallway outside Marcus's room had softened with golden light. The rain had cleared, leaving the windows bright and the air scrubbed clean. Charleston rooftops glistened beyond the glass, and somewhere below, traffic hissed along wet pavement. Emily arrived with a walker, while Dr. Reeves stood nearby with his hands in his coat pockets. Marcus looked at the metal frame, then at Blizzard. The dog stood at once. Slow, Marcus said. Blizzard stepped to Marcus's left side, close but not crowding, his shoulder aligned with the chair. Emily helped Marcus rise. It was not graceful. His knees trembled. One hand tightened around the walker until his knuckles shone. His breath caught once, and Blizzard moved half a step closer, pressing his side gently against Marcus's leg. Not enough to knock him off balance. Just enough to remind him that balance could be shared. Marcus closed his eyes for one heartbeat. When he opened them, he took the first step. The hallway seemed impossibly long for 20 feet. The floor reflected the overhead lights. A laundry cart waited near the wall. Two nurses stopped mid-conversation. A man in a robe shuffled from another room and slowly turned his head. No one clapped. No one cheered. The moment did not need noise. Marcus took another step, then another, the walker tapping softly ahead of him. Blizzard moved with him, white paws silent, amber eyes lifting every few seconds to check the Marine's face. Halfway to the nurse's station, Marcus slowed. Pain crossed his expression, not sharp enough to name, but deep enough to bend his shoulders. Dr. Reeves took one step forward. Emily did the same. Blizzard was faster. He stepped in front of Marcus and sat, blocking the path with his body, then looked up at him with steady, solemn eyes. Marcus let out a breath that shook. You calling a halt? Blizzard did not blink. Emily covered her mouth. Dr. Reeves looked away for a moment, but his shoulders shifted with quiet emotion. Marcus lowered his head, one hand still gripping the walker, the other reaching down until his fingers brushed Blizzard's ear. All right, he whispered. 1 second. The hallway waited with him. For that 1 second, the world became very small. A Marine, a dog, the smell of clean floors, the faint warmth of afternoon sun, and a silence full of people remembering that strength sometimes looks like stopping before you fall. After a few breaths, Marcus straightened. Forward. Blizzard rose immediately and returned to position. They completed the 20 feet. At the nurse's station, Emily placed a hand over her heart, and one of the younger nurses turned away with tears in her eyes. Marcus looked at the counter, then at the floor, then at Blizzard. He had crossed battlefields once with less fear than he had carried across that hallway. But this time, when he reached the mark, he was not empty. He was met. Dr. Reeves checked his watch, though everyone knew time was not the thing being measured. Back to the room, he said gently. Marcus nodded. On the return, his steps were slower, but his posture was different. Blizzard stayed beside him, patient and exact, his white coat brushing Marcus's leg every few steps like a quiet prayer. When they reached the chair again, Marcus eased down with a tired sigh, and Blizzard rested his head on the Marine's knee as though placing a medal no one else could see. Emily finally let the tears fall. Marcus looked at her, then at the dog, and a small, humbled smile crossed his face. 20 feet, he said softly. Dr. Reeves nodded. 20 feet. Outside the window, the last of the storm clouds opened, and sunlight filled the room until the empty bed no longer looked empty at all. The afternoon light grew warmer as it filtered through the tall windows, casting long, golden rectangles across the polished floor of the ward. Blizzard lay close to Marcus Carter, his head resting lightly on the Marine's knee, ears twitching every so often at the distant beeping of monitors and the faint hum of hospital activity. Marcus reached down, brushing his fingers through the thick white fur along the dog's neck, feeling the rhythm of a heartbeat steady beneath the coat. Outside, the city streets glistened with the memory of the morning rain, cars passing in steady streams, the distant call of seagulls echoing over the rooftops. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the soft scrape of Blizzard's claws as the dog shifted slightly, making space for comfort without disturbing the balance they had created. Every inch of the room spoke of small victories, the gentle arrangement of blankets, the hum of the heater, the way light played across the walls. Emily Hayes moved softly behind the chair, adjusting a pillow without looking directly at them, giving them the space the moment required. Dr. Reeves checked the monitors again, nodding to himself, and stepped quietly to the doorway, his gaze lingering on Blizzard's unwavering focus on Marcus. No words were spoken, none were needed. Marcus lifted his hand, fingers curling over Blizzard's muzzle briefly, a tactile acknowledgement that trust had returned. Stronger than the night before, he breathed in, the familiar scent of the dog grounding him, weaving through the scattered memories of dust, sand, and long stretches of desert, of nights spent under stars with nothing but the soft pad of paws and the steady warmth of companionship. Blizzard shifted again, a subtle movement, curling slightly against Marcus's side, offering presence rather than demand, loyalty without expectation. Marcus let the tension fall from his shoulders slowly, the weight he had carried for months releasing into the quiet support of the dog beside him. Outside the window, sunlight angled differently now, bouncing off the hospital signage and glinting along the silvered street below, painting the room in a softer glow. Emily returned with a small cup of water for Marcus, setting it gently on the tray table. Blizzard lifted his head at the sound of the cup moving, sniffed, then returned his gaze to Marcus, unflinching. Marcus lifted the cup and took a careful sip, the taste of water grounding him further in the room, in the moment, in the tangible reality of recovery that Blizzard had anchored. He lowered the cup slowly, placing it on the tray, then rested a hand atop Blizzard's head, thumb brushing behind the ears in the same measured rhythm that had defined their time together. The room was full of small sounds, the soft whir of ventilators, distant footsteps, the faint rustle of paper, but all of it seemed secondary to the bond present in the space between the Marine and the dog. Blizzard's amber eyes followed every subtle movement, every flicker of attention, aware of the man's needs before words could be spoken, of the unspoken language built on years of shared trust, patience, and quiet understanding. Marcus flexed his fingers slowly over the dog's fur, and a small smile tugged at his lips, the first full expression since waking, subtle but real. He felt an almost imperceptible shift inside him, the steady calm that only Blizzard could bring, the knowledge that he was not alone, that someone had stayed when others had left, that the waiting, the vigilance, and the unwavering faith of a single creature could carry more power than any words, any procedure, any charted plan. Outside, shadows began to lengthen as the sun moved across the sky, catching on the edges of blinds and floor tiles, turning ordinary light into gold. Marcus leaned back slightly in the chair, feeling Blizzard's weight against his leg, steady, reassuring, an anchor to the present and a bridge to what lay ahead. Emily watched from her corner, brushing away a small tear unnoticed, while Dr. Reeves quietly adjusted a monitor, acknowledging that sometimes healing required more than medical expertise. Marcus looked down at Blizzard once more, fingers still resting lightly along the neck, and whispered softly, "We will make it." Blizzard pressed closer, a single, slow exhalation, a confirmation that the promise had been understood and accepted. In that still, sunlit room, the world outside moved at its own pace, but inside, a Marine and his dog found a rhythm, a quiet resilience, and a shared trust that would carry them forward together, step by measured step, heartbeat by heartbeat, paw by patient paw. Evening settled over Charleston with a gentle blue hush, washing the hospital windows in the last soft color of day. The storm had passed completely now, leaving the streets below clean and shining, the sidewalks glimmering beneath street lamps that flickered awake one by one. Inside the ward, the air had grown quieter. Visiting hours were nearly over. The dinner trays had been cleared. The nurses moved in softer steps, as if the whole floor had agreed to protect the peace that had found its way into room 412. Marcus Carter sat in the chair beside the bed, tired from the walk, tired from the paperwork, tired from the kind of hope that asks a man to stand up before he feels ready. But he was not hollow anymore. Blizzard lay at his feet, his white body curved in a loose crescent, one paw touching Marcus's shoe, his amber eyes half closed but aware of everything. Every time Marcus shifted, the dog opened his eyes. Every time Marcus breathed unevenly, the dog lifted his head. It was not duty now, at least not the kind printed on records or spoken in commands. It was something older, a promise that had survived distance, silence, and the long confusion of being separated by people who meant well but did not understand what they were handling. Nurse Emily Hayes came in just before 7 with a small envelope in her hand. She had changed out the water pitcher, checked the blanket, and lowered the blinds halfway against the darkening sky. Then she stood by the bed, holding the envelope as if it weighed more than paper. Marcus looked up. "What is that?" Emily smiled, but her eyes were bright. "Something Captain Brooks left at the desk before he went back to the liaison office." Marcus took it carefully. Blizzard sat up at once, ears lifted, eyes fixed on the envelope. Marcus opened it with slow fingers. Inside was a temporary authorization card, a printed copy of the approval, and a smaller photograph tucked behind the page. The photograph showed Blizzard at the rehabilitation kennel outside Savannah, sitting near a chain-link gate, white fur clean but dull, eyes fixed toward the road beyond the fence. On the back, someone had written, "He watches every vehicle that slows down." Marcus stared at the words. The room went quiet around him. Emily folded her hands at her waist, saying nothing. Blizzard leaned forward, nose touching the edge of the photograph, then looked up at Marcus. The Marine's face changed in a way no monitor could chart. Pain moved through it first, then regret, then something gentler than both. He lowered the photograph and pressed his thumb over the handwritten note. "You were waiting the whole time," he whispered. Blizzard shifted closer, resting his chin against Marcus's knee. Marcus bent forward, not quickly, not easily, but with care, until his forehead touched the dog's. "I am sorry, boy." The words were almost too quiet to hear. Emily heard them anyway, and turned toward the window to give them privacy. Blizzard did not need an apology explained. He answered the only way he knew how. He breathed in, slow and deep, taking in Marcus's scent, then leaned his full weight gently against the Marine's legs as if to say the distance had ended the moment the voice returned. Down the hall, Dr. Reeves paused outside the door with the night nurse, both of them stopping when they saw the scene through the glass. Neither entered. Some rooms become chapels without anyone naming them. Marcus lifted the authorization card and read the words again, though he had already understood them. Temporary therapeutic companion approval. Initial recovery period. Review pending. Human beings always needed language for mercy before they could allow it to stay. Blizzard needed none. He had already accepted the assignment. Marcus placed the card on the bedside table beside the old photograph from Camp Pendleton. Past and present lay there together, two small pieces of proof that time had taken them apart but had not erased the path back. Emily stepped forward at last. "He can stay tonight," she said. Marcus looked at her, and for a moment the staff sergeant in him, the wounded man in him, and the grateful friend in him all seemed to meet behind his eyes. "Thank you." Emily nodded, but her voice softened. "I think he decided that before any of us did." Marcus smiled, and this time it held. Blizzard's tail moved once across the floor. Outside, the first stars appeared above the wet city, faint but steady, reflected in the hospital glass like small lights left on for travelers. Marcus eased back in the chair, one hand resting on Blizzard's shoulders. He thought about the empty bed, the long night, the 20 feet to the nurse's station, the paperwork, the waiting, the old tag, the note on the photograph. None of it felt like a clean ending. Healing rarely arrives that way. It comes unfinished. It comes with trembling knees and forms still pending. It comes with a dog sleeping close enough to wake when your breathing changes. Blizzard lowered himself again, this time with a long, peaceful sigh, and closed his eyes against Marcus's shoe. Marcus watched him for a while, then looked toward the window where the dark had turned soft and blue. He did not say a prayer out loud. He only placed his hand over Blizzard's paw and held it there. In the quiet of that room, beneath the hum of machines and the glow of city lights, loyalty did what it had always done. It remembered. It waited. It found its way home.